nascono i vari sviluppi e le diverse tendenze internazionali nel nostro mondo? Si tratta di sviluppi puramente casuali e naturali o c'è dietro un calcolo, una qualche pianificazione? La TV ha già parlato in numerosi servizi di personaggi facoltosi e influenti che tirano le fila, che sostengono l'eugenetica e la riduzione della popolazione e ambiscono attivamente al controllo demografico. Anche la mappa mondiale della massoneria pubblicata di recente su vetopedia.org mostra come molte delle istituzioni che dominano il nostro mondo abbiano legami con le società segrete. Secondo il motto è un grande club, ma tu non ne fai parte. In questo servizio presentiamo un altro tassello che fornisce indizi sull'esistenza di un piano per il controllo e la riduzione della popolazione. Si tratta delle testimonianze rese già nel 1988 dal medico statunitense Lawrence Dunegan. Egli, nato nel 1933 e deceduto nel 2004, era un pediatra che esercitava a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Uno dei suoi professori all'Università di Pittsburgh era Richard Day, vissuto dal 1905 al 1989. Il 20 marzo del 69 partecipò a un convegno dell'Associazione di Medicina Pediatrica tenutosi al ristorante Lamont. Era stato invitato come oratore principale e parlò per circa 2 ore davanti agli 80 medici presenti. Illustrò i suoi piani elitari per il futuro che intendeva rivelare agli ascoltatori affinché potessero prepararsi al meglio a ciò che li attendeva. Prima di iniziare chiese al pubblico di spegnere tutti i dispositivi di registrazione e di non prendere appunti. È grazie al dottor Lawrence Dunegan che il contenuto del discorso si è aggiunto a noi. Dichiara di essersi sforzato per ricordare e documentare negli anni seguenti quanto udito quella sera. Nell'88 registrò su nastro i ricordi e le sue riflessioni su quel discorso che si stava già avverando. Nel 91 rilasciò anche un'intervista al riguardo, della quale esiste anche una registrazione. Cosa c'era di così particolare nel professor Richard Day, l'illustre relatore ospite di quel convegno a Pittsburgh nel 1969? Aveva insegnato per decenni presso la Columbia University di New York, la cui facoltà di medicina era stata ristrutturata e potenziata dai Rockefeller e fino a poco prima di quel convegno era stato anche direttore medico di Planned Parenthood USA. Planned Parenthood è stata fondata dalla eugenista Margaret Sanger con il sostegno finanziario dell'eugenista John D. Rockefeller Jr. Secondo la rivista medica The Journal of Pediatrics, il professor Richard Day aveva accettato quell'incarico perché convinto che la sovrappopolazione fosse il problema più grave da affrontare. Alcune affermazioni contenute nel suo discorso sull'Università Rockefeller e la sua attività presso istituti legati alla fondazione omonima destano il sospetto che abbia avuto accesso a informazioni riservate a determinati circoli elitari. Sebbene alcune anticipazioni del professor Richard Day non si siano ancora avverate, un numero sorprendente di previsioni molto dettagliate sono già diventate realtà o stanno per farlo. Ciò conferisce particolare peso alla testimonianza del dottor Lawrence Dunegan del 1988. Lo scrittore e commentatore investigativo David Icke ha ripreso le profezie di Richard Day nel suo programma The Dot Connector dell'aprile 2022, confrontandole con gli attuali sviluppi internazionali. Poiché quelle profezie stanno acquisendo una sempre maggiore attualità, la TV le ha tradotte per presentarle qui di seguito. Dato che David Icke nel suo videocast tratta solo una parte delle anticipazioni del professor Richard Day, a chi volesse approfondire l'argomento consigliamo le registrazioni originali del dottor Lawrence Dunegan indicate tra le fonti del presente servizio.
Hello and welcome to the David Icke Dot Connector videocast. Well, I know there are some people that think the COVID hoax is sort of over and that the battle has been won, but it hasn't. We are right in the middle of a fantastic agenda to enslave the entirety of humanity. And what I'm going to do today is give you an example of how long this has been planned, and therefore it's not going away unless we make it so. So you may have seen, of course, a lot of the COVID restrictions rolled back. But that doesn't mean they can't return. Have a look at what's happening in China now. And also, this is much, much bigger than COVID. That has been a massive operation, hoax, to advance this agenda very quickly in the last 2 years or so. But it's only part of it. It's not actually it. It is far, far bigger than that. So, like I say, today I'm going to give you an example of how long this has been planned, and not only how long, but to the fine detail involved. So I'm going to look at what a man called Richard Day, Dr. Richard Day, said in 1969. That's 20 years after Orwell's 1984, and nearly 40 years after Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Now, they are officially novels, but as I've said over the years, they weren't coming anything like entirely from their imagination. There was a lot of knowledge in there about what was actually coming. And in terms of Dr. Richard Day in 1969, it wasn't a novel at all. This guy was a big Rockefeller insider. He was a professor of pediatrics at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. And he was an executive of Planned Parenthood, a Rockefeller operation that began life, as it would with the Rockefeller family, in the eugenics movement. And we've had Bill Gates say in interviews that his father ran Planned Parenthood at one time. This is the Gates family that is extremely close to the Rockefellers. Bill Gates is a Rockefeller gopher. The same Rockefeller family that created the World Health Organization and now has Bill Gates run it for them, to the end that we have not only clearly seen in the last 2 years, but with this planned treaty between the World Health Organization and member countries, the next stage is that the World Health Organization becomes a full-blown global health dictatorship, lack of health, dictatorship, where what it says goes in all those countries. So no one knows why Dr. Richard Day said what he did in the situation that he did. But I, for one, am extremely grateful that he did, because he revealed so much about what is happening now. Richard Day, being a professor of pediatrics, stood up at a gathering of pediatricians in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1969. He asked the audience not to take notes and to turn off recording equipment, because he was going to reveal, and it turned out in detail, how the world was going to change, because basically that which he represented was going to change it. And this is what I refer to as the global cult, the global network of secret societies with an interlocking leadership, a spider at the center that's driving this Orwellian, fascist, communist, technocratic agenda for the world. And I reveal at length in a book called Phantom Self what Richard Day said that night, because one pediatrician, a man called Lawrence Dunegan, did take notes. And before he died in 2004, he did a series of interviews revealing what Day had said in 1969. And he did it because he could by then see that what Day said was going to happen was happening. And today, as you're going to see, spectacularly more so. So, one of the things he said in 1969 is that we can cure almost every cancer right now, and that the information to do that was on file at the Rockefeller Institute, now called the Rockefeller University. He said that they're not revealing this cure for cancer because people have to die of something, so they might as well die of that. And it's necessary to keep the population down anyway, he said. So this Rockefeller Institute is very interesting and very significant because the whole modern theory of a virus basically comes out of the same Rockefeller Institute, the institute that was created by the infamous J.D. Rockefeller in 1901, the same J.D. Rockefeller who was the instigator and creator of the big pharma cartel that's now producing all these fake vaccines that are creating death and health mayhem all over the world. And the director of the Rockefeller Institute was a man between 1937 and 1956, a man called Thomas Milton Rivers, who just happens to be known as the father of modern virology. So let's put this together. You have the father of modern virology working for the Rockefellers. The Rockefeller family that created the big pharma cartel, and the cartel that has exploited the alleged theory of viruses to make enormous amounts of money and gather enormous amounts of control, the COVID era, I rest my bloody case. And all that is a coincidence, right? No chance. And Dr. Richard Day was a Rockefeller insider who in 1969 revealed to those pediatricians in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, what was going to happen to the world, and it has and is happening. The same Rockefeller family that created the World Health Organization in 1948 as part of the United Nations, which they also were fundamental in creating. Indeed, the land on which the United Nations building stands in New York was given free by the Rockefeller family. And the World Health Organization just happens to have been the central point of driving the response to, quote, COVID. So, this is some of what Dr. Richard Day told those pediatricians all those decades ago, 1969, as reported by Dr. Lawrence Dunegan. Now, how about this first one in the light of very current events? We, he said, the cult, are going to make boys and girls the same. 1969. He said it was part of the plan that people would be made gender neutral. Boys and girls would be the same, and reproduction without sex would be performed in laboratories. This is what Aldous Huxley described in Brave New World. Parentless production of the species without procreation. And this is what I've been talking about all these years in terms of the creation, which these fake synthetic genetic alleged vaccines are all involved in, of transforming the human body from human 1.0 to human 2.0, which would be a non-procreating human. And he went on to talk about politics. He said that very few people really know how government works. You're not kidding. He said something to the effect that elected officials are influenced in ways they don't even realize, and they carry out plans that have been made for them that they think they are the authors of when they're not. Something else I've been going on about for so long. These people have no idea that this cult exists. Most of them don't anyway. The insiders do, of course. And therefore, they don't really know where all this policy and direction of the world is coming from. But they are kidded into believing that somehow it's coming from within their circle, when it's not. But actually, Day said, they are manipulated in ways they don't understand. He went on to say that most people don't understand how governments operate, and even people in high positions in government, including the United States government, don't really understand how and where decisions are made. Exactly. One of the statements, Dunegan reports, was having to do with change. The statement was, people will have to get used to the idea of change. So used to change, they'll be expecting change. Nothing will be permanent. Look around. Sound familiar? This often came out in the context, Dunegan says, of a society where people seem to have no roots or moorings, but would be passively willing to accept change simply because it was sold to them with an ostensible purpose which will make it acceptable to them, when there was really a second real purpose which would further the goals of establishing this new order, what's now called this Great Reset, this new system, as Day called it. He said, people are too trusting, people don't ask the right questions. So this is something else I've talked about over the years, going way back, how there is a real reason why something happens, and then there's the cover reason that people are supposed to believe it's why it's happening. And so, for instance, and these two things are almost every time complete inversions of each other. So if you look at what they call COVID, then all that's happened was supposed to be to protect the health of the population, when actually it was to destroy the health of the population and totally transform global society. That's the reason you want to believe that is for your health. We're nice, we are. The real reason, actually we're not nice. Ukraine. It's supposed to be a war where everything relates to Russia. That's the reason that we're given for it. When actually what it's really about is targeting the global economy, especially in the West, as part of crashing the global economy so that they can bring in this new system that Day talked about, what I call creative destruction. If you want to bring in something new, you've got to destroy what went before. So Day then talked, 1969, about a global economic dictatorship. The stated plan, reported by Dunegan, was that different parts of the world will be assigned different roles of industry and commerce in a unified global system. The continued preeminence of the United States, just wait for this one, 1969. The continued preeminence of the United States and the relative independence and self-sufficiency of the United States would have to be changed. Now, you look at what's happening in America as a result massively of the Biden administration, but the whole process was happening before. It's just gone into overdrive now. They are demolishing the economic structure of the United States. They have been, for decades, outsourcing to China, making China have control over the supply chain of many times basic things. And what's happening with the fuel price, the energy price that's going on is that the US economy, and so American people, and in Europe, are being crushed, and the economy of the United States being dismantled. Dunegan said this was one of the several times that Day said that in order to create a new structure, you first have to tear down the old. And American industry was one example of that. Look what's happened to American industry since this guy spoke in 1969. It's all planned. This was especially true, Day said, of the heavy industries of the United States that would be cut back while the same industries were being developed in other countries. Centrally controlled money. Money would become predominantly credit. It was already, money was primarily a credit thing, but exchange of money would not be cash or palpable things, but electronic credit signal. People would carry money only in very small amounts for things like chewing gum and candy bars, he said. Just pocket sort of things. Any purchase of any significant amount would be done electronically. Earnings would be electronically entered into your account. It would be a single banking system. It may have the appearance, he said, of being more than one, but ultimately and basically it would be one single banking system. So that when you got paid, your pay would be entered for you into your bank balance. And then when you purchased anything at the point of purchase, it would be deducted from your account balance and you would actually carry nothing with you. This is the cashless society that I've been warning about since around 1992 was coming. And we have this follow-up from Day. Also, computer records can be kept on whatever it was you purchased, so that if you were purchasing too much of any particular item and some official wanted to know what you were doing with your money, they could go back and review your purchases and determine what you were buying. Exactly what is happening today. And look at the carbon credit cards that are being introduced, where you can only purchase a certain amount of things with a carbon footprint, as they call it, until that carbon limit is reached, and then the card won't work until the following month. Another fascinating thing he said in 1969, the ability to save would be greatly curtailed. People would just not be able to save any considerable degree of wealth. There was some statement of recognition that wealth represents power, and wealth in the hands of a lot of people is not good for the people in charge. So if you save too much, you might be taxed. The more you save, the higher rate of tax on your savings. So your savings really could never get very far. Well, look at negative interest rates and look at inflation. What is inflation except a tax on savings, which progressively, while sitting there, lose value all the time? Also, if you began to show a pattern of saving too much, you might have your pay cut. We would say, well, you're saving instead of spending. You really don't need that money. The idea is to prevent people from accumulating any wealth which might have long-range disruptive influence on the new system. And this guaranteed income that they're planning, after they've destroyed all the jobs and those that remain are taken over by AI, is all about living from guaranteed income to guaranteed income. You will own nothing but be happy, according to Klaus Schwab's organization, the World Economic Forum, which of course is a massive expression of this. So, 1969, Day moved on to microchipped people. So the next step, Dunegan reported, would be the single credit card. And then the next step would be to replace the single card with a skin implant. Now, he says here in this other statement, electronic payments initially would all be based on different kinds of credit cards, but people would have credit cards with the electronic strip on it, and once they got used to that, then it would be pointed out the advantage of having all of that combined into a single credit card serving a single monetary system, and then they won't have to carry around all that plastic. What is he describing? the smartphone, exactly what's happening now. So the next step after that smartphone single card would be to replace the single card, smartphone, with a skin implant. The single card would be lost or stolen, given rise to problems, could be exchanged with someone else to confuse identity, Day said. The skin implant, on the other hand, would not be losable or counterfeitable, would be hackable though, or transferable to another person. So you and your account would be identified without any possibility of error. And the skin implants would have to be put in some place that would be convenient to the skin. For example, your right hand or your forehead, right on the third eye, for people who go into that level of stuff. There was some mention also of implants that would lend themselves to surveillance by providing radio signals. 1969. Citizens could be identified by a certain frequency from his personal transmitter and could be located at any time or any place by an authority who wanted to find him. Precisely what's happening in China and increasingly around the world. Oh, but it's not a conspiracy, it's not planned, it's all random. This would be particularly useful for someone who broke out of prison. There was more discussion of personal surveillance, and he was describing what we're seeing massively around us today. Now, another thing he said in 1969, the imposition of the world system might require a nuclear war. If there were too many people in the right places who resisted the world dictatorship, there might be a need to use one or two, possibly more, nuclear weapons, he said. As it was put, this would be possibly needed to convince people that, quote, we mean business. That was followed by the statement that by the time one or two of those went off, then everybody, even the most reluctant, would yield. Present company accepted, by the way, chaps. He said something about this negotiated peace after the nuclear war would be very convincing as a kind of in a framework or in a context that the whole thing was rehearsed, but nobody would know it. People hearing about it would be convinced that it was a genuine negotiation between hostile enemies who finally had come to the realization that peace was better than war. And oh my goodness, how long I've ever been talking about this. And we have a modern, present day expression of this. Zelensky in Ukraine, Putin in Russia, controlled by the same people. And so this theater goes on, this stage show, and then they say, oh no, we've actually come to our senses now and we want peace. But what will the peace be? It will be the system this cult wants. The phrase that I coined back in the 1990s, I think it was. Problem, reaction, solution. Create the problem. Get the reaction. Do something. Offer the solutions to the problems you have covertly created. Engineered terrorism. In 1969, he said terrorism would be widely used in Europe and in other parts of the world. Along with this came a bit of a scolding that Americans had had it too good anyway. And just a little bit of terrorism would help convince Americans that the world is indeed a dangerous place, or can be if we don't relinquish control to the proper authorities. Problem, reaction, solution. Population control and killing the elderly. Everyone has a right to live only so long, Day said. The old are no longer useful. They become a burden. You should be ready to accept death. An arbitrary age limit would be established. After all, you only have a right to so many steak dinners, so many orgasms, so many good pleasures in life. And after you have had enough of them and you're no longer productive, working and contributing, you should then be ready to step aside for the next generation. And he's not talking about retiring either. And here's an example of just how the fine detail has been planned in all this. Day said that some things that would help people realize that they have lived long enough were, several things Dunegan said he mentioned. He didn't remember them all, but these were a few. The use of very pale printing ink on forms that people have to fill out so that older people wouldn't be able to read the pale ink as easily and would have to go to younger people for help. This is happening. I see it all the time. The tiny, tiny printing on bottles and what have you that, only the people with great sight could see. This is the scale that we're talking about, that this manipulation's going on. All of it, in the end, psychological. They said that automobile traffic patterns would be instigated for this. There would be more high-speed traffic lanes, traffic patterns that older people with their slower reflexes would have trouble dealing with and thus lose some of their independence. And a big item that Day said was something he elaborated on at some length, Dunegan said, was that the cost of medical care was made burdensomely high. Medical care would be connected very closely to one's work, and unless they had a remarkably rich supporting family, old people would just have to do without care. And the idea, Day said, is that everybody says, enough, what a burden it is, the old people, on the young, to try to look after them. Then the young would become agreeable, he said, to helping mum and dad along the way, providing this was done humanely and with dignity. And then the example was there could be like a nice farewell party, a real celebration. Mum and dad had done a good job, and then after the party's over, they take the demise pill. So you live so long, and then you're out here by law. And so we look at the COVID period again, and the massive, massive cull of old people around the world through drugs like midazolam and remdesivir in the United States and elsewhere. And they're culling the old. What are they doing with these fake vaccines? Oh, well, the elderly and the vulnerable, they need a fourth and a fifth. It's a cull. Mass murder. Predicted by this guy, because he knew. Education, they said that children would spend more time in schools and not learn anything. Look around. And he said schools would become the center of the community. And put another way, schools would start to take the power over a child's upbringing from the parents. And the school would do it on behalf of the state, which would do it on behalf of the cult. And so now you're seeing these parental organizations coming to the fore, where they are demanding that they have the right returned to parents to decide what happens to their kids. All this stuff with social services around the world, taking children from loving parents for spurious reasons, that's all part of this. He's talked about putting more and more pressure on children, causing students to burn out. In this connection, and later on, in the connection with drug abuse and alcohol abuse, he indicated in 1969 that psychiatric services to help would be increased dramatically. Exactly what has happened. Those who couldn't take the stress would fall by the wayside and therefore would become dispensable, expendable, said Dunegan, I guess is the word I want or I'm looking for. So Day also said that computers were going to be introduced into education. And at that time, he said anybody who wanted computer access or access to books that were not directly related to their field of study would have to have a very good reason for doing so. So watch this unfolding as we go forward. Otherwise, access would be denied, and books that you shouldn't be reading, according to the authorities, would be banned. Hello? And constant change. Back to that theme again. He said nothing is permanent. Streets would be rerouted, renamed. Areas you had not seen for a while would become unfamiliar. Among other things, this would contribute to older people feeling that it was time to move on. They feel they couldn't even keep up with the changes in areas that were once familiar. Buildings would be allowed to stand empty and deteriorate, and streets would be a depressed atmosphere for the unfit. Somewhere, the purpose, he said, was to provide basically what he called a jungle society. Somewhere in this same connection, he mentioned that buildings and bridges would be made so they would collapse after a while. There would be more accidents involving airplanes and railroads and automobiles, and all this is to contribute to the feeling of insecurity that nothing was safe. So this is the reason, creating this atmosphere of fear, that George Soros, for instance, a cult operative, crikey, talk about blatant, is funding the election of district attorneys across America, who, when they get in, stop prosecuting crime and start letting violent people out onto the streets again. It's all part of this agenda that Day talked about in 1969. Portrayal of violence, movies, video games, in other words. Violence would be made more graphic. This was intended to desensitize people to violence. There might need to be a time when people would witness real violence and be part of it. Later on, it would become clear where this is headed. So there would be more realistic violence in entertainment, which would make it easier for people to adjust. People's attitudes towards death would change. Food control. Food supplies would come under tight control. Stick around if you want to see that. Food shortages would be created in a hurry, and people would realize the dangers of overpopulation. Ultimately, whether the population slows down or not, the food supply is to be brought under centralized control so that people would have enough to be well nourished, but they would not have enough to support any fugitive from the new system, the Great Reset. In other words, if you had a friend or relative who didn't sign on to the Great Reset, and growing one's own food would be outlawed. This would be done under some sort of pretext. Dunegan said, in the beginning, I mentioned there were two purposes for everything. One, the ostensible purpose, and one, the real purpose. And the ostensible purpose here with food, growing your own food, would be that growing your own vegetables was unsafe. It would create or spread disease or something like that. So the acceptable idea was to protect the consumer. But the real idea was to limit the food supply, and growing your own food would be illegal. If you persist in illegal activities like growing your own food, then you become a criminal. Weather control. Richard Day was involved in weather control during World War II, so it was a subject he knew a lot about. Dunegan said there was mention of the weather. This was another really striking moment. He said, "We can or soon will be able to control the weather." 1969. He said, "I'm not really referring to dropping iodide crystals in the clouds to precipitate rain that's already there. That's one way that they were doing it then. But real control. And weather was seen as a weapon of war, a weapon of influencing public policy. Human-caused global warming. Climate change. Oh, look, we got this extreme weather. It's climate change." He talked about this technology. It could make rain or withhold rain in order to influence certain areas and bring them under your control. There were two sides to this that were rather striking, Dunegan said. They said, on the one hand, you can make drought during the growing season so that nothing will grow. And on the other hand, you can make for very heavy rains during harvest season so the fields are too muddy to bring in the harvest. And indeed, he said, one might be able to do both. There was no statement how this was done. It was stated that either it was already possible in 1969 or very, very close to being possible. And Day also said that what they were going to do to advance this agenda was going to falsify scientific research. Well, COVID, human-caused climate change, on and on and on, falsifying scientific research is exactly what they're doing. Follow the science. No, follow the bloody lies. Another one. Mass movements of people. Richard Day said that there would be mass movements and migrations of people without roots in their new locations, because traditions are easier to change in a place where there are a lot of transplanted people, as compared to trying to change traditions in a place where people grew up and had an extended family where they had roots. And this is the reason why people like George Soros have been funding the organizations that have led to the mass movement of people from different cultures into the West. This is why, under the Biden administration, the frontman Biden, nothing more, the southern border of the United States has basically been thrown wide open. And something like 2 million and growing people are coming across the border illegally every year. Exactly that reason, to break down the culture of a society so that people just lose what that society is and therefore become less resistant to this global system. And by the way, they're targeting the West now, and they're targeting the countries of predominantly the white race now. But the idea is once they've been subjugated, they target all the others. Because what this global system is meant to be is a massive, centrally dictated monoculture based on technology, a technocracy, in which there will be no individual cultures. None of them that we see today. What was that? First they came for the communists. I was not a communist, so I did nothing. And then finally, they came for the Jews, and I was not a Jew, so I did nothing. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. That's exactly what's going on now with the targeting of Western culture. Mass mind control. Somewhere in the presentation, he made two statements, Dunegan said, that I want to insert at this time. One statement, people can carry in their minds and act upon two contradictory ideas at one time, provided that these two contradictory ideas are kept far enough apart. And the other statement was, you can know pretty well how rational people are going to respond to certain circumstances or to certain information that they encounter. So, to determine the response you want, you need only control the kind of data or information that they're presented with and the kinds of circumstances that they're in. And rational people, I think I would question that description, will do what you want them to do. They may not fully understand what they are doing or why. And what he's describing there, something I've written at length about, is cognitive dissonance, where you can have two contradictory beliefs at the same time and not see that they're contradictory. So the state is killing vast numbers of people with these fake vaccines, but the state is doing it to protect our health. And then the second one about all you need to do is control the data, that's what the censorship's all about. Control of information, because information forms perception, and perception dictates behavior. Control information, you dictate behavior. It's all planned, and that's what misinformation is all about. So he went on to talk about, in effect, the creation of the internet. And he's talking in 1969. One more thing was said, Dunegan reported. You'll be watching television and someone will be watching you, Day said, at the same time at a central monitoring station. Television sets would have a device to enable this, smart TVs, and that's only the kind of early versions of them. The TV set would not have to be on. in order for this to be operative. Also, the television set can be used to monitor what you are watching. People can tell what you are watching on TV and how you're reacting to what you're watching. And you would not know that you were being watched while you were watching your own television. This has now been shown to be happening with smart TVs. How would we get people to accept these things in their homes, Day said? Well, people would buy them, and when they buy their own television, they won't know at first that they're on their own television. This was described by being what we now know as cable TV to replace the antenna TV. And when you buy a TV set, this monitor would just be part of the set, and most people would not have enough knowledge to know that it was there in the beginning. And then the cable would be the means of carrying the surveillance message to the monitor. By the time people found out this was monitoring was going on, they would also be very dependent upon the television for a number of things, just the way people are dependent upon the telephone today, Day said. Now, this is where we come to the whole internet prediction. One thing the television would be used for would be purchases. You wouldn't have to leave your home to purchase. You just turn on your TV and there would be a way of interacting with your television channel to the store that you wanted to purchase from. And you could flip the switch from place to place to choose a refrigerator or clothing. This would be both convenient, but it would also make you dependent on your television / computer. So the built-in monitor would be something you could not do without. We're talking about televisions, but of course, it's well known now that your computer is monitoring you to the point where you can have a conversation while not online with a platform about some product or something. And then when you go into that platform, Facebook or something, you're suddenly being shown adverts for what you've had a private conversation about in your own home. He was predicting this in 1969. Orwell was talking about it in 1948 with his telescreens. And he said that any wire that went into your house would be used for surveillance. And Day was talking about a World Wide Web, in effect, that wasn't officially invented until 1969. And the technology that it was based on, created by DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon. And this is so relevant to present time. Human settlement zones. Privately owned housing would become a thing of the past. The cost of housing and financing housing would gradually be made so high that most people couldn't afford it. Hello? People who already own their houses would be allowed to keep them, but as years go by, it would be more and more difficult for young people to buy a house. Young people would more and more become renters, particularly in apartments or condominiums. You will own nothing but be happy. More and more unsold houses would stand vacant, but people just couldn't buy them. But the cost of housing would not come down. You'd right away think, well, the vacant house, the price would come down. People would buy it. But there was some statement by Day to the effect that the price would be held high even though there were many available, so that free marketplaces would not operate. I mean, there's no reason why house prices should be going through the bloody roof now in the present economic circumstances, but they are. So people would not be able to buy these, and gradually more and more of the population would be forced into small apartments that could not accommodate very many children. Now, these are the micro apartments I've been warning about again for decades in the books, that we're now seeing all over the world. Micro apartments, tiny, tiny things being built as new, because that's the accommodation for the slaves of the Great Reset. Then, Day said, as the number of real homeowners diminished, they would become a minority. There would be no sympathy for them from the majority who dwelled in the apartments, and then these homes could be taken by increased taxes or other regulations that would be detrimental to home ownership and would be acceptable to the majority on the whole process, of course, of divide and rule. Ultimately, and this is where it's planned to go, ultimately people would be assigned where they would live, and it would be common to have non-family members living with you. This by way of you not knowing just how far you could trust anybody that you live with. This would all be under the control of a central housing authority. Have this in mind, he said, of things like censuses. When they ask how many bedrooms in your house, how many bathrooms in your house, do you have a finished games room? This information is personal and of no national interest to government under our existing constitution. But you'll be asked those questions and decide how you want to respond. And then finally, the system in general. Disappearance of dissidents. He said in 1969, when the new system takes over, the Great Reset, people will be expected to sign allegiance to it, indicating that they don't have any reservations or holding back to the whole old system. There just won't be any room, he said, for people who won't go along. We can't have such people cluttering up the place. So such people would be taken to special places. And here, Dunegan said, I don't remember the exact words, but the inference I drew was that these special places where they were taken, then they would not live very long. He may have said something like disposed of humanely, but I don't remember very precisely. Just the impression the system was not going to support them when they would not go along with the system. They would leave and death would be the only alternative. Somewhere in this vein, Day said there would not be any martyrs. Dunegan said, when I first heard this, I thought it meant that people would not be killed. But as the presentation developed, what he meant was they would not be killed in such a way or disposed of in such a way that they could serve as inspiration to other people the way martyrs do. Rather, he said something like, people will just disappear. And then bringing in the new system. He said the bringing in of the new system probably would occur on a weekend in the winter. Everything would shut down on Friday evening and Monday morning. When everyone wakened, there would be the announcement that the new system was in place. During the process running up to that, in getting the United States ready for these changes, everybody would be busier with less leisure time and less opportunity to really look about and see what was going on around them. So no, it's not over. And events are not random. They are planned, even down to fine detail. COVID has been a stage, continues to be a stage in this unfolding transformation of human society, but only a stage. And even that's not gone away. Now they're fake vaccinating the smallest of kids with stuff that will, and has already been shown to have killed and maimed fantastic numbers of people worldwide. So we are dealing with an evil articulated there that the non-evil obviously would struggle to comprehend. But we must comprehend it, and we must deal with it, and we must not fall for the idea that because a few restrictions have been rolled back, that somehow the battle is won and it's over. If they're rolling back these restrictions, they're doing it for a reason. And remember, the foundation of everything they do is psychological. It's control of the mind, which means control of behavior, which means control of you. And we are going to have challenges coming at us like machine gun fire. To complete this journey to unimaginable tyranny. And we must meet those challenges with unwavering spirit, because that's what they're after, to break our spirit and to therefore bring us into meek compliance to their will. They want to break our spirit, and we must not let them, because if we do, what Day described, and there's so much more, will happen. Look around. It is happening.
Uno sguardo allo specchio degli avvenimenti mondiali ci rivela che, con le parole vuote ormai, qui non si ottiene più nulla. Come affrontano Ivo Sasek, la sua famiglia e i team dell'OCG questo periodo così difficile?
In altre parole, non chiudiamo gli occhi per ignorare semplicemente i problemi del mondo, per poi vivere una vita il più piacevole possibile, nonostante tutte le crisi evidenti. Mai no. Noi vinciamo il complotto con la forza in noi da Dio. Ogni nemico confrontato con Dio ci dà forza per mai scappare.